You are listening to PatchBay on TYM KRS.
Welcome to PatchBay, show where we like to talk about audio engineering, recording, stuff like that. Shane and I, we both do this all the time, all week long, and then Monday rolls around and our break's finally done. And what do? We record a podcast and we share it with all of you.
And exactly. And we discuss audio for the most part.
This doesn't really feel like work, though, I must say.
No, it doesn't. Not at all. Well, it does help that I'm drinking wine currently while doing said podcast, but not that hasn't happened in the studio before, but yeah. So last week we were discussing, we were getting really geeky last week. We were talking about transistors and capacitors and all that kind of stuff, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, a bit of interference and whatnot, I think. Yeah. But,
Interference?
Yeah, like all sorts of technical details involving how to avoid interference.
Right. That's what the conversation was about. That's right. Yeah, that was a good one actually. The one thing that had come to my brain, since you have a variety of synthesizers at your house, I was going to ask, how do you normally record said synthesizers, since they're all analog, aren't they?
Oh goodness. Really depends on what I'm doing, I guess. And which instrument, right? Like
Yeah.
anything else, you kind of have to approach it from what do you have around for recording, and what are your options, and what's going to work well with each thing. Because synthesizers have been around a lot longer than people think they have. That's one important thing to note. A Hammond organ, mine are from the 50s, but they go all the way back to the 30s, and those are synthesizers. They may use electromechanical methods to synthesize, but they definitely synthesize waveforms. So, in the 30s,
they were making synthesizers.
And they were recording them too. So, yeah, I mean, it's depends on what you want it to sound like, I guess. Which one were you thinking?
Oh, well, no, because obviously there's some of the synthesizers you just have speakers on them, right?
Yeah.
Do they have you wired outs for them, or like? Because I know I have, I can't remember what kind of organ it is I have at work, but I have it's just sitting there that we got, and it doesn't have any outs whatsoever. So anytime I ever do need to use it for something, it's really cool too, because it's like 8-bit, like Mario kind of sounding organ, which
awesome.
is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a picture of it and
Let's
send it to
see.
you. I can't remember what it is.
On the
But I've mic'd speaker before.
On the old organs, I've done a couple of things. I have a Leslie cabinet. That's the thing with the spinning speaker. And that makes awesome Doppler. And if you put mics out in the room and stereo mic that, you can pick up the Doppler effect.
Really?
Of the spinning speaker cones in there. That's a really fun one, and that's been used on like every rock and roll song ever. So that's a pretty standard thing to do.
I was just rereading Here, There, and Everywhere, the book that Jeff Amick wrote about recording the Beatles. And his first session, he ran John's voice through Leslie for, I believe, Tomorrow Never Knows, I think was the song.
Yeah, you can use them for all sorts of things besides organs, but man, oh man, do they sound good with a Hammond.
Yeah.
So there's that, and another way I can do the Hammonds is to actually mic. I have console organs, so they actually have a field coil speaker built into them. They're old enough that they have the real field coil speakers rather than a permanent magnet speaker. If you don't know what field coil it is, that's instead of having a magnet on the back of the speaker, it actually has a big electromagnet, and they're pretty awesome speakers. If you're a guitarist, you could probably make a very, very excellent sounding amp cabinet thing with a field coil speaker and get a clarity that you would never be able to achieve with a permanent magnet speaker. But If I catch you taking them out of functional organs, I will personally beat you with a stick. Because they're very valuable and they haven't made any since the 50s and they're never going to make any more.
Oh,
So they are absolutely a treasure and do not gut organs to get them.
do
It's
not
not
use.
okay.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
speakers will still be okay long after that organ is dead. Just wait. Sit
yeah.
there and
Wait for
wait.
the die.
Yes.
That's funny. Damn guitar players, eh?
Yeah.
I've never heard of a field coil before. That's interesting,
Well, it's
actually.
very old technology and it's very good technology. There's a reason why they didn't make them anymore, and it's not because they weren't good. It's because they cost an arm and a leg to manufacture. That
Oh,
back
really?
electromagnet has, miles of copper wire wound around it.
Right,
So,
right, right.
they just, there's no way that we could afford to buy them nowadays.
Yeah,
The
the cost.
third way that I record those is the gas pedal on those organs, the expression pedal makes it louder, is
Right.
actually a big air variable capacitor. When you push that pedal down, you're actually swinging fins in and out of a big air variable cap uh, through rotary motion. And the output of that goes into the amplifier. This is between the preamp stage and the amplifier stage. So if you tap into the output of that air variable cap and add a DC blocking capacitor and tie it to, say, the tip on a instrument cable, and you tie the shield of your instrument cable to the ground circuit of the organ. Now, mind you, you should do this carefully because there's high voltages present. But
Way to blow up an amplifier.
well, way to shock yourself bad too.
Yeah, yeah,
So you
yeah.
really shouldn't work on these organs unless you know what you're doing. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but
That's interesting,
you can
though.
tap right in there like it's a line out. You should be a little bit careful with your selection of capacitor, and you should check it. Make sure that you're not swinging too high. You don't want to like hook this up to a very expensive console or something like that, and blow out something. But if you know what you're doing and you know how to test these things, you can get a nice clean line out right out of the expression pedal before it even goes through the final amplification stage of the organ. But the final amplification stage sounds really nice on those, so you may not want to skip it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's neat, actually. So you have ran some of your synths through amps as well when you were recording.
Yeah. I like to
Yeah.
you take like the Wurlitzer electric piano, which is sort of another electromechanical device. It when you push the key, a hammer hits a little metal tine, and the tine vibrates under a big pickup. It's
Cool.
essentially works the same as a guitar pickup, it's just really long. And the output of that is kind of like the output of a guitar. It has a preamp and it goes to an amplifier, and you can tap into that before the amplifier and plug it into various guitar amps if you wanted to add reverb or tremolo or anything like
Mm.
that. You could.
Well, that's cool. It's really cool.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
like
have.
hacking into those old things and giving the ability to add guitar pedal effects and that sort of thing. And with the
Yeah.
more modern synths, yeah, I mean, I build them from scratch. So obviously, I usually build in some sort of a line out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And actually, a question for that too. I know you're building the module part of it. So what do you do for the controller? Are you are you hooking it up MIDI to a controller, or what do you? How do you? What?
Yeah, you could do a MIDI controller. I mean, that's fairly. And for the actual brand new synths that I cook up from scratch, a lot of them are controlled by programs running on microcontrollers. Some of them are controlled by um, some sort of physical controller like an XY joystick or a set of buttons or
Oh, cool.
I can do whatever. MIDI is just a protocol for allowing things to talk to each other. So you can use MIDI to allow a standard MIDI keyboard to be used to control these synthesizers. You could use MIDI to allow a computer like a DAW to control these synthesizers, which is really cool. But it's
Yeah.
also limited in a certain way. MIDI is it puts you into sort of a box. It's
Mhm.
like playing a guitar where you can't bend the notes. It's
Mm.
being able to have a little bit more control over the way in which a electrical circuit behaves doesn't always follow the exact rules of how the assumptions of how
Yeah.
musical notes should behave in relation to one another. They're not always the same language.
Right.
So it's nice to be able to get away from MIDI if I want to and control these things in a more literal fashion in their own language. Because then I can be
So
more
what you're
expressive musically.
so what you're doing is you're writing like program data that tells the synth like MIDI, but you're writing it. I'm trying to wrap my head around how you
Yeah,
play
this is
them.
really technical stuff, and I mean, I'm
That's
happy
all
to
I'm.
talk about it. It's just finding a way to do it is sometimes a little bit challenging because it is so deep of a level.
I can,
Are you
yeah, I can
familiar with
understand. Like,
tracker programs from back in the day?
uh, well, I tracker. I
Like,
was thinking about
okay,
that
so
Tymkrs.
these days when you have a DAW and you want to like program, say, a drum pattern into your DAW, you're
Mm.
basically dropping the notes on a grid.
Yeah.
Okay, back
Oh, I know what
in
you're
the
talking about.
early days of computers, a tracker, you'd be using basically hexadecimal values in a grid, and the tracker just reads through this grid and it controls all of the different aspects of the synthesizer for the game, like say Mario Brothers, whatever, would have had a tracker built into it. And it's just reading through all of these numbers and it's changing which note it's playing, how long the note stays on, all that sort of thing, just through this
Yeah.
big table of numbers. I essentially can build a tracker into any of these synthesizers like on board because they have
Cool.
so much extra processing power these days. Just with a microcontroller, I've got extra horsepower there
Mhm.
so that it can have its own simple controller, you know, basically a computer playing it for me if I want to, right there inside of the synthesizer.
You know, now that you're talking about it, I I have seen a tracker program, like actually a DOS-based tracker program, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the modern
That a
day
guy was
DAWs
using.
sort of grew out of those. So, it's a
Yeah,
lot of us music and producer type people have seen them. It's just been a while.
yeah, exactly. Now that we're talking about it, I do. I'm sort of. It's ringing a bell now. That's interesting, actually. I was going to mention too the idea about using buttons or like an XY controller. It's almost like pushing the not theremin per se, but that kind of. It's interesting.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
cool.
totally. There's no rule that says you have to control these things with a piano keyboard, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
the Moog synthesizer, the one that started most of this, didn't start out with a voltage controller style keyboard on it. It was
No.
just, you create this voltage level and you give it to the synthesizer and it generates frequencies based off of that with its VCOs.
Yeah,
And it
create. You have a
wasn't
certain.
until musicians showed up to play with the thing that they came up with the idea of, well, I'd sure like to be able to play an A, Bob. And Bob's
Yeah,
like, well, I don't do music. What do you need to play an A for? We're
yeah,
free here. We can play anything. And the musicians are like, but it's really important that I can just play an A, Bob.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If we ever do a commercial, we could use that exact line that you just said. Yeah, no, you're right though. Yeah, it because he was making them from the geeky standpoint of building a synthesizer, but not for any kind of
Yeah, yeah.
practical application other than to be see if he could do it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're neat. So you're talking about the big modular sort of.
Totally. Yeah. Modular synthesizer. So sexy.
There's a picture somewhere on do a Google search, but there's a picture of Billy Corgan at a studio just lately from the Smashing Pumpkins, and there's a modular synthesizer behind them that's the size of 8 by 10 foot wall behind them
Yep.
that they ended up using on the latest record. I don't know what that one is, but I've seen it before in a few other pictures too. I'm not sure if it's a Moog or if it's something else, but
Yeah. Well, there's a whole big, huge scene going on amongst guys who are in popular bands and are more in the producer role at this point. A lot of those guys are starting to build very, very extensive modular synthesis systems in their personal studios. I can think of a few offhand. Deadmau5, for example, uses it. Um, Trent Reznor has a very, very large collection of,
It's a huge
yeah.
one, yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is something that the guys who really know what they're doing and are doing really well doing it, they're getting into this modular synthesis stuff really heavy in the last decade or so. So it's an important thing to know about if you're into producing and recording and engineering music. You should really know what's up when it
Yeah.
comes to actual like modular synthesis. It's kind of complicated to get into and build up a fundamental knowledge of, but once you start rolling, it's really not that complicated.
There's two things that sort of came into my mind while you were talking about that. One, there used to be a program. I'm not sure if it's still around. But it was like MXPX or Max MXP or something like that that would allow you to build synthesizers, modular type synthesizers, but just as it was a standalone program. I'll have to find it. It was actually kind of neat. You could build like every single piece of the chain, which was kind of neat, and it was good too for building out ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and then I don't remember the name of the software offhand. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Not specifically, but I have definitely used similar software for various things. It's very cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I was going to mention too about um, there's this one girl I follow on Twitter. Her name's Tara Bush.
Okay.
She's this big synthesizer remix kind of person, and I can't remember her website off the top of my head, but um, I'll post it in the show notes. Anyway, she's got really cool stuff though, but she has a bunch of sort of YouTube tutorials where she's doing remixes, and she'll have tracks she's laying down, and then she'll be filtering things through synthesizers or Mooger Foogers or all those types of things. And anyway, you probably like her stuff, and she's just like a huge sort of Moog fan. Like I don't know how many synthesizers she's got, but she's got lots. Anyway, yeah. So I would check her out.
So up in Canada up there,
Yeah,
have they not gotten the memo that it's Moog?
it's no, it's we call it Moog up here.
Huh, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
There's another one too. Um, you say reverb the way I say reverb, right?
Reverb, yeah.
Yeah, I know there are guys. My friend, um, Big Toe Studio, Alan Wagner, he used to do a podcast, and he said reverb completely different. It was damn it, I can't even remember how he said it, but I was always like, what? It's reverb, but yeah, it's just one of those things, I guess. Well, you say latency, right?
Yeah, I could say it either way depending on who I'm talking to, but yeah, I know who I'm talking to, so I try to keep things
Yeah,
northern,
as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
So yeah,
analogsuicide.com.
so she's running things through outboard equipment, but she's doing it more of like thinking of it as modular synthesis way of approaching the problem, which I totally approve of.
Yeah, she actually does. I'm just looking at a picture here online, and she's standing behind a huge wall of modular synthesizers. So
Yeah.
she's definitely but yeah, she's sort of a keyboardist type musician plus remixer kind of stuff. I quite like her stuff. Some of the remixes she's done, and her own stuff too. But anyway, that's slightly off topic. But check her out.
Yeah,
I'll post
so I don't know. I can control it any way I want, and you could go as crazy as doing a theremin approach where it's very organic and analog in your inputs by using things like, well, you got to remember, listeners, this is one of the shows that we do, and many of the other shows that we do on this network involve me having to learn how to use things like IR detectors or GPS sensors or any of these things. And because I can use them at a hardware level, I can use them to control music. We were
Yep.
recording a podcast last night, and there's going to be this big, high purse sized competition for developing some in the field medical equipment. And my partner over here at the studio is a full time nurse, and she works on electronics on the side. And some of the sensors that are involved in the contest involve an airflow sensor. And I'm sure a lot of you guys out there have seen those MIDI controllers that run off of wind, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I was thinking that I could build like bagpipes or a squeeze box out of her sensors that she gets in this package that they're sending over, so I could create a sort of music controller for my synthesizers that ran like a wind-controlled instrument.
That's cool. I remember reading an article about guys who were using, well, MIDI at the time, but they were using, and they were doing stuff like that. They were using, well, there are wind controller MIDI instruments you can buy, but I remember reading this guy was using light and dance to create music. So he had sort of like light beams that if you ran your finger across would trigger samples or notes or whatever. So, and he created a whole show based around that technology. Sort of, it was kind of a neat idea. I'm guessing maybe using IR. I'm not really sure, but it was kind of neat anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
The
there's
same
absolutely
premise.
no rules when it comes to this sort of thing. It's basically,
Yeah.
if you think about it, like so many of the instruments that have become the standard instrumentation for our world, they they developed out of what makes sense mechanically in the real world.
Hmm.
And then we had to sort of come up with this digital simulacrum of all of them, some way to make them all playable from the same interface. And the piano keyboard was probably the best choice that we could have made. But
Hmm.
we've brought our technology to the point where that's no longer true anymore.
Hmm.
We can
I
create our own interfaces for things that make more sense for those instruments. And if you're interested in this topic, I might suggest going and looking up a guy named Moldover who does shows around. I think he's out of LA or something. And he basically creates his own controllers using arcade buttons and hacked up MIDI keyboards and all that sort of thing to control programs like Ableton. So he
Mhm.
can play his samples live and loop them live and all that sort of thing. Unlike a lot of the more electronic uh, performers, he's not pushing play and sitting back and letting the machinery do the work. He's actually
Mhm.
mashing the buttons to trigger all of the events through his
That
Ableton
drives me
Live.
nuts. We were having a conversation about this last week at band practice, and I was saying that there needs to be a clear definition between a DJ and, like, there's turntablists, but there needs to be a definition between your regular club DJ and a guy who's actually creating somewhat spontaneous music
Yeah.
live, whether he's using some loops off of a record and adding stuff and maybe mixing in other real music. But there's a definite difference between the two, and that the moniker of DJ, I think, is it's just a bad. I don't know. I would rather them call themselves EMs or something like electronic musicians or it because it to me it's like, and it'd be hard to, not so much hard to market, but I mean if you're, if somebody says, yeah, hey man, I'm a DJ, I'm like, okay, you want to do my auntie's wedding? It's like, well, no, this is not the right guy to be, kind of, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. And there's plenty of good examples of why the line has become so blurry that it's impossible to even. I mean, you can look at some people and be able to very clearly say, okay, that person is a DJ and that person is a musician. A
Yeah,
turntablist is a musician. It's not a
yeah,
DJ because what
yeah,
they're doing
exactly.
there is like a physical thing, creating a sound right then and there, and it's different every time. A DJ is playing something that has been previously produced in its
Yeah.
entirety, and maybe if you're lucky, cross mixing between tracks in a talented fashion. Um, but
Or
yeah.
even so much as, yeah, taking the instrumental from one song and putting the vocals from another song on it, but it's still not the same as some of the other more
And that's
some
not to say that
but yeah.
DJs don't do something very cool. I think they do. I
Oh, I
think
know,
it's very
and
neat.
I'm not ragging on them either. I'm just saying that I feel like there should be a sort of a line in the sand to a
Yeah, it's
degree,
very, very difficult. It's very difficult right now
just to
because a
stop
lot
it
of
from
the
being
best
that thing.
DJs out there, they produce their own vinyl,
Yeah.
and then they're mixing off of stuff that they produced to create things live. And that's when the line starts to get blurry. And then you start getting into things like, yeah, we mentioned him earlier, Dead Mouse. He's a lot of his stuff is done through Ableton Live and it's triggered. But a lot of it's, all those samples are created in advance. They may be being pulled up and triggered live and being, brought together into the actual song in a live fashion. But there's only so much of that that you can do live. And then you've got guys like Beardy Man over in the UK who is the, world beatboxing champion for like the last 15 years or something.
Mm.
Dude has 4 loopers that he runs and a bunch of effects boxes off of each of them. And he literally, just through beatboxing and creative use of looping, is able to produce very, very awesome music completely live, creating the sounds from scratch while he's putting them into the looper, which is absolutely mind blowing. So it is possible, but in order for it to be possible, you have to set certain limitations for what you can put into your production, right? You can't sample a string section and bring it with you. You have to be able to create it right there in the fly, and that's difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Or just I mean, as long as it's been created by you at some point, rather than stealing, a James Brown riff, or I mean, I'm sure those guys do tend to use those throwback things once in a while. But yeah, I mean, if it was whether it's created live at the time or it was created in the studio and is being played back live, it's still music that was created by they're still a musician. It's, I mean, I've seen country bands play live to a click track with like a DAW running, and they've got steel guitar tracks and mandolins and fiddles playing in the background. You're looking at the stage going, there's 4 guys on the stage and they all have guitars and drums in their hands. So I mean, that technology is happening even in stuff where you wouldn't even expect it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
it's
you're
a
not.
lot easier for them to
Yeah.
get away with it on those genres too, because the folks listening, they don't really they don't think that the technology coming out of the electronic music scene would have anything to do with their music. But oh, no.
Exactly.
They use
Yeah.
it
Well,
just
it's
as much.
and I think for most sort of people who are sitting in the audience, they wouldn't even really catch it. But it's like the people that who are in bands or do music or whatever. Like, I don't see a steel player.
Yep.
I hear a steel player. I was gonna mention. Damn it.
I always see that in movies
Okay,
too,
lost
where
it.
they're doing like any movie that has to do with music or TV shows with musicians and they start to sing and then they're playing piano and I'm like, okay, this is okay. But then like the drums start in the background and the string section comes in and I'm looking at the screen, I'm like, there's no drums, there's no strings, you guys are annoying my yeah.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that Just Friends movie. That uh, that one girl, I can't think of her name. She's so annoying, but she's in the studio or whatever, and she's it's the thing. They're multi-tracking everything, and she's yelling at the producer that she can't get into the song because she can't play her guitar, and the producer's sort of a kind of a wingnut, and he's like, well, we have to keep the tracks separated, blah blah blah. And she's like, well, but you're stealing my soul. It's like the song is about me and my guitar, but I'm not playing my guitar, so I'm totally. Anyway, it's hilarious. Yeah. Have you seen that movie with Ryan Reynolds?
I don't.
Friends?
Maybe I've seen so many, Shane.
Yeah, it's good. Anytime there's any kind of recording thing on a movie, I'm like, ooh, I gotta watch this.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
usually
Me
that
too.
case.
Me too. And I'm usually
Oh, you've got an icon.
disappointed at how they portray us,
Oh,
but
every time. Like, oh, look, there's a nerdy guy picking his nose. He must be the engineer.
yeah, it doesn't. But it's always the same, no matter what profession you're in. If you see your role portrayed in a film or TV show, it's always disappointing to say the least, because it's
Except
not
for
the
cops.
real version. It's the dramatic version.
Yeah, I was gonna say, except for cops, probably. That's probably the only profession where it's like, yeah, it's never ever the same. Or, well, I mean, sure, it could be, but you don't have the boss reaming you out and blah 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 kind of thing. Anyway,
That's 30 minutes, Shane. You got
we're at
anything else
30
you need?
minutes.
We are
That's good.
totally at 30.
No, there was a bit there I was gonna say, but it's completely lost on me now, so I won't worry about it.
All right. Well, that's
Wrap it
all the
up.
time we have for this week, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next Friday. You can find our show up at patchbay.tv. Usually goes up in the evenings. You can automatically get it downloaded to your phone or iTunes or whatever if you want to, with the RSS feed on there, or just listen to it right on the page if you want to do that. Okay, that's it for us. We'll see you guys next week.
Good night.